13,344%. That's the increase that the ATF did under President Biden of trying to revoke and attack the licenses for gun sellers and retailers. 13,344%. I did the math. You don't see changes like that without massive policy, massive politicization, and unfortunately, massive problems and aftershock to come. Something that a lot of people don't talk about, but we need to, is the lasting legacy and the dark shadow thrown across what this politicization and weaponization of the ATF has done under the President Biden administration. So guys, let's get into it. So I'm going to roll through a couple of the numbers so you can see just how crazy this is before I get into some of the quotes from ATF insiders about the damage that this will cause, before I tie this off with my own experience about what I see here on the ground as somebody who talks to FFLs. Let's roll through some of this. So when President Biden took office back in mid of 2021, there was 6 months left in that year. From July through December is what we have as far as data goes. During that time, the ATF, if you're just trying to get baseline numbers of like what was happening before the politics really came in, the ATF tried to revoke about 6 licenses, successfully revoking 5. Okay, so that's across 6 months. So if we double that up, we're on about 12 per year. Then this kind of thinking took over. I'm going to pull a quote from Vice President Harris, who said, quote, "I will require that for any gun dealer that breaks the law, the ATF takes their license," end quote. Now, President Biden, of course, took this thought and ran with it. Because you can see this in 2022. So instead of going after 12 licenses, they went after 171. Successfully revoking 88 after a hearing. In 2023, we went to 322, successfully revoking 157. Then in 2024, 812, successfully revoking 397. So we went from 12 to 812, or worded another way, in President Biden's first year that we have statistics for, according to the ATF report attached in the description box below, we actually went from 6 to 812. That's a 13,344.33% increase in the ATF moving to revoke licenses. Couple things to understand. Number one, what the ATF is doing is they're going in and they're doing inspections. They're auditing to make sure that the FFLs have all their books, which they are required to maintain as far as what's coming in, what's going out, the disposition of things to make sure that things are disposed of in the proper time frame. After a NICS check, you've got 30 days. So if you move it on day 31, you're technically in violation unless you did another NICS check to reopen that 30 days window as an example, and so forth. Every I must be dotted, every T must be crossed. Hey, really quickly, 2 things. Number 1, if you're enjoying this video, of course, all the YouTube things, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Number 2, we've got a sponsor for this video, and that's my law firm. It takes me, I think as you can guess, a fair amount of time to research for these videos, put them together, come and film them, all that kind of good stuff. Not to mention Derek, our brave videographer and editor, who is, of course, working full-time for the law firm to come in and do all that kind of good stuff as well. So something you can do if you're enjoying our legal education content is please consider giving our Google My Business page for the law firm a 5-star review. It's something that really helps out the practice, which at the end of the day allows me to come here and play internet lawyer for you. So it's absolutely free, takes a few moments. Just check it out in the pinned comment below. It's also in the description box. Follow the link. It asks you to rate us on 0 to 5 stars. Keep in mind, this is the internet. 3, 4 stars, kind of a failing grade. So if you felt like you get good, decent legal education content, please consider leaving a 5-star review. I appreciate it very, very much. Now back to the program. I want you to imagine for a moment what would happen to many of you if the IRS actually looked at every last little thing that you're doing. Or if you had a cop who somehow had a drone that was following you for every single stop sign you did not come to a 100% stop at, or every time you exceeded the speed limit by 1 mile per hour, or every time that maybe that thing your accountant said, going back to the IRS, yeah, this should be a good ruling as far as what we can take as a deduction. And then all of a sudden the IRS agent says, nah, no, not the way it works. Now imagine if the Department of Motor Vehicles in your state said, you know what, every time someone breaks the law, take their license. Take their driver's license, revoke it, gone, done. How many people would still have a driver's license? Imagine if the IRS, every single time they audited someone, if they found one thing that was off, criminal charges, jail, prison, fines. Imagine if you are a dealer, if you've got a brick and retail motor store, let alone if you've got employees, you have potentially well into the thousands and thousands and thousands of moving parts in any given, maybe even month, year, decade, you name it, that happens between audits, okay? The chances of getting everything 100% correct 100% of the time is effectively 0%, or it's pretty dang close to 0%. And longtime ATF agents know this. Talking to people off the record over the years, they would be the first people to tell you that, look, yeah, you're not going to have a perfect run. Historically, they're looking for malicious noncompliance, the person who's intentionally breaking the laws, flagrantly ignoring them. That's the person who they're really trying to go after historically. But the so-called zero tolerance policy shift, where if you break the speed limit by 1 mile per hour, if we can go after you, we will, that's a radically different politicization. That's a radically different reshaping of the relationship between ATF and the FFLs. Why is this important? Well, aside from the fact that if you know FFLs and you feel bad for them, and the fact that now they've got to be hiring lawyers, purchasing expensive software, all that kind of stuff in order to protect themselves so they don't lose their license, which, by the way, increase their cost of doing business. Who do you think ultimately bears that cost? You. This is an indirect tax on you, the person purchasing from all these different retailers. Make no mistake about it. It is a deterrence from people from wanting to even get an FFL, if knowing that they're going to have to go through a colonoscopy every handful of years, and they're going to have to be sweating it out, potentially with a lawyer, about whether or not they're going to lose their license, lose all their property, maybe even wind up facing criminal charges because, after all, zero tolerance. How many gun dealers do you think we're going to have if this was the persistent approach for decades on end? Do you think this starts to look like a problem? Now, keep in mind, I'm going to read a quote now. Suffice to say that many warnings were cried out and were issued and given about weaponizing the ATF for politics, as President Biden did. This comes from a former interim head of the ATF, who said this, quote, ATF's role in and of itself presents a significant challenge. The Bureau doesn't exist to diminish constitutionally guaranteed rights, but instead to combat violent crime and ensure the industry and gun owners are able to freely exercise their rights within the laws enacted by Congress. ATF's reputation is dependent on remaining an apolitical, unbiased, and fair law enforcement and regulatory agency. That fair treatment and respect for fundamental liberties begins at the top. The agents and inspectors in the field deserve nothing less, and the American public, whether gun owners or not, deserve equal treatment, end quote. I think we can have some fair disagreements about whether or not ATF's role in practice or in theory is actually to protect the Second Amendment, but certainly under an anti-gun president, it does not work out that way. Rest assured, as we have seen. Another retired ATF agent, the same one, by the way, who blew the whistle on Operation Fast and Furious. Remember the one where we were giving all the guns to the cartels? Peter Fratelli once wrote, quote, the gun dealers were our first line of defense against gun trafficking. This is according to a New York Post back in August of 2023. So when license revocations were reported to have skyrocketed at the time, 350% in the first 9 months compared to 2022 to 2023, quote, why are we now beating an ally into submission? Fratelli wrote. Gun dealers are your allies. Retailers are your allies. It's plain and simple. Instead of now calling the ATF if they think an employee did something wrong, do you think you're going to have that cooperation? Do you think you're going to have necessarily the cooperation and try to figure out things in different investigations all the time? Don't get me wrong. I'm sure many times you will. I'm not cheering for people to not have cooperation. That's 0% what I'm doing. I'm simply saying human behavior is that if you keep beating them, eventually they will flinch when you raise your arm. They will flinch when they think about you. This is not promoting the communication and enhancing that relationship that if the ATF is genuinely after getting the bad guys, that they need in order to do that. Talk to any cop in the street. If they're out there working tough neighborhoods, they need the cooperation of people who live, work, and play in those neighborhoods in order to get the bad guys. Every time. Why are we destroying the relationship between the ATF and FFLs? And how long might it take to get that back? Looking ahead, on the legislation front, we have Kansas's own Representative Tracy Mann, who introduced the Rifle Act. I always love seeing the creative acronyms they come up with, RIFLE, Reining in Federal Licensing Enforcement Act, which is set to basically restore that necessary and trusted relationship, according to Representative Mann, between the lawful firearm industry as well as the ATF, so that we can try to protect the good guys while going after some of the bad guys. In a nutshell, it's basically what it says. Similar legislation is expected to be introduced into the United States Senate if it isn't already done so at the time of this video. I got into an interesting discussion with Bill Kirk. It should be going up on his channel, Washington Gun Law, if it has not already, where we got to talking about, at SHOT Show, what do you do with the ATF? Because if you just destroy them, it's not like other agencies aren't just going to absorb those same powers and responsibilities. Now, if we're trying to protect the Second Amendment, rather than having all of our problems, or a lot of them, concentrated in one agency, now we've got to chase down multiple different agencies. So the good news about the ATF, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but the good news about the ATF is so many of our problems are concentrated in one agency. We've got one agency to really deal with hard, that we can rein in, put the lid on it, all that kind of stuff. The bad news is, well, so many things. As easy it is to basically try to regulate them to protect the Second Amendment, as we have seen here, clearly illustrated, it is so easy to weaponize it and mobilize it against the Second Amendment. I'm not saying I support the ATF. Let me be clear. All I'm saying is that there is some hidden costs to doing away with them. In my perfect world, we obviously have all those powers, because we really need to be looking at this as what powers do they have, right? Their ability to create rules, going after manufacturers, retailers, the ability to go after certain products within the industry, all that kind of stuff, right? Bump stocks, pistol braces, you name it. Those powers just go to other agencies. And if those agencies are somehow even worse, or if they are equally as weaponized as the ATF in the future, what did we really solve here? That's my concern. We've got to play that 3D chess game to think about how do we deal with the powers? Because we aren't harmed by the three letters ATF. We're harmed by what they can do. That's what we need to solve, both now and especially for the future. Let me know your thoughts about all that down in the comment field below. Don't forget to hit that like button. Let's close out with one of our ever popular quote of the days. I think this one's rather appropriate when it comes to right now in 2025 America and the ATF. This one comes from Benjamin Franklin, who once said, quote, "Never leave to tomorrow what can be done today." I hope that there's going to be structural changes addressing those power dynamics and issues, because those are the threat. Those are the threats. We appreciate you sticking around this long, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.